Shalom from one of my most favorite places in the earth, the mountains of Jerusalem, the mountains of Jerusalem. We are here in Moza, the place where my family has lived since 1930. And I'm going to read to you from Psalms 125. It says, "Those who trust in Adonai, they are as Mount Zion, which cannot be moved, but abides forever. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so Adonai surrounds his people from this time forth and forever. For the scepter of wickedness shall not rest upon the land of the righteous, so that the righteous will not put forth their hands to do wrong. Do good, O Adonai, to those who are good, and to those who are upright in their hearts." This is a very important psalm because I believe it's all about this area. First of all, understand that the mountains surround Jerusalem. And these mountains are mighty important because they are the gates of the city, the protection of the holy city of Jerusalem. Includes many settlements, but I am right now in Moza, but we have Mevaseret Zion nearby, and we have the Mount Castel that was very pivotal for the opening of the road to Jerusalem after the War of Independence. Now, this particular place fits the bill of Psalms 125 perfectly because right behind my back is the ruin of the house of a very wicked person. He was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem during the time of Hitler, during the Second World War. His name was Haj Amin el-Husseini, and this was here, his summer house, right where my family lives, just a stone throw away, so to speak. And this particular Mufti was the scepter of wickedness that was actually resting in this area. Because this Mufti went to visit Hitler in 1941, and he proposed to Hitler to raise him an army to effectuate the final solution against the Jewish people right here inside of the land of Israel, the then called Palestine, because the Romans changed the name from Israel to Palestine because of the name of the Philistines, who were the arch enemies of Israel. But we are talking about the land of Israel. There were many Jews living here, as I said, even my own family, and I've got family that has lived here for many generations, even inside of the old city of Jerusalem, and here around the mountains of Jerusalem, especially in the area of Moza. And so this Mufti said to Hitler, "Raise for me an army." Eventually that army was called the Palestinian Cause, or the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, that developed into the Fatah and eventually even the Hamas, that is very well or evil known throughout the nations as a terrible terror group. So the Palestinian Cause as it is today, it's actually Hitler's child. It is the scepter of wickedness that has been resting in the land of the righteous, as we have the summer house of the Grand Mufti that did everything in his power to annihilate the Jewish people within the land of Israel, and he is still living through the Palestinian cause. Every Christian organization that supports the Palestinian cause, they are actually supporting the destruction of the Jewish people as concocted by the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem with Hitler. So this is Hitler's child. And therefore I want to show you, and I will show you in interviews that you're going to see even in this program, of local people. One of them is my own family member, my own cousin, and then a local guide of the area of Moza, that until 1917, when the British Mandate started, all of them were under Turkish rule. That's the Jewish people that were here too. And they had an ID, and the ID was a Palestinian ID. In other words, if we are going to talk about the Palestinian cause, we can also talk about the Jewish cause, because the Jews were at that time, they were, so to speak, inhabitants or citizens of the then called Palestine. But from 1948, the land reversed into its original name, which is the land of Israel. And so that we know that God really means business with this. He repeated the name Israel, connected with both the land and the people of Israel, about 2,500 times in the Bible. And he also said clearly that the scepter of wickedness shall not remain in the land allotted for the righteous. So as we are going to blow the shofar right in this place, overturning the curse that this Mufti brought to Israel through the Palestinian cause, because Genesis 12:3 says that he will bless those who bless Israel and he will curse those who curse Israel. In fact, also in the book of Jeremiah, we can also see in chapter 16 of Jeremiah that Yahweh promised to the Arab inhabitants of the land, or what he calls my wicked neighbors that come against the inheritance of my people Israel. He said that if they will learn to swear by Adonai and not by Baal or Allah or any other foreign god, they will have an inheritance in the midst of the land. So I believe that many of the Arab citizens of the area, if they will learn to honor Israel and the God of Israel, they will actually be blessed in the midst of the land of Israel. But instead of that, they've chosen, since the time, well, not only Haj Amin and Husseini, but all the way from the time of the terrible massacres in 1929 that happened right here in Motza, and you're going to hear a story about it. And they happen in Yafo as well, near Tel Aviv. Those are very well-known terrible massacres of Arabs that turn against their Jewish neighbors that at the time they were simply tilling the soil, working the land and doing good to the entire area, bringing prosperity, bringing blessing, healing their wounded, healing their sick. And they turn around and they repay evil for good. And that's been the case in general. But those that actually bless Israel, they will have an inheritance in the midst of the land. That's a great promise that the Arab citizens have here, but it shall not happen until the scepter of wickedness is removed from the land of Israel. And that scepter of wickedness is the scepter of Haj Amin el Husseini, together with Hitler, Hitler's child, called the Palestinian cause, that is seeking to completely annihilate Israel and to take over the entire land. And Psalms 83 says, so that the name of Israel will be remembered no more. But as I say, this is the 70th of Israel. And after 70 years, we came out of Babylon. And I believe after 70 years, we are also coming out of this terrible curse of Hitler's child for the annihilation of Israel. And the Oslo Accords are already cancelled. And now it's time to cancel the entire agenda of the Palestinian cause. This is not a political issue. This is a covenant issue. And anybody that is in the covenant with the living God will want to do what is right in his eyes. He clearly states in his word that the scepter of wickedness will not remain in the land allotted for the righteous. And that's why the United Nations for Israel is arising right here at the gates of Jerusalem, fulfilling the words of Psalms 125, as the mountains surround Jerusalem, so Adonai surrounds his people. What can I tell you? My heart is swelling with emotion, knowing that my own family has been settling this area already from 1930, and my family has been settling Jerusalem in the Old City generations upon generations. That is my personal blood family. And so praise the living Yah that we are on sure ground, on the Word of God, and rooted on what the people of Israel have done throughout the years to establish the covenant of restoration of the people to the land of Israel. As Ezekiel says, 36:24-28, Adonai will return us from all the lands where we've been exiled, and he will give us back this land, and he will give us a new heart and a new spirit in this land. I have fulfilled that prophecy here, and so is my family fulfilling this prophecy. And I am going to interview Amir Cohen, who is a local guide here. And this is very exciting because Amir, his father, used to have a special identity card before 1917. אמיר, שלום.
שלום.
אז היה לך, אתה אומר שאבא שלך היה לו תעודת זהות שבו היה כתוב משהו מעניין. He had a special ID. Let's see what ID card you had.
אבא שלי נולד במוצא ב-1909, והייתה לו תעודת זהות טורקית. כי הטורקים שלטו בארץ ישראל עד סוף 1917.
So in their ID it said Palestine. In other words, the nationality that they had was Palestinian right here, and his father had it, and many others had it as well. In other words, everyone was a Palestinian until 1917 because the Romans changed the name of Israel for Palestine. אז אם ככה כולם היו פלסטינאים פה.
נכון, כל מי שנולד בתקופה הטורקית, וכיוון שארץ ישראל נקראה אז פלסטין, אז לכן גם כל אלה שנולדו פה היו פלסטינאים.
Now that is quite amazing because, Hitler said that if you repeat a big fat lie enough times, everybody will believe it. And so everybody believes today that the Palestinians are only those that are Arabs that are here and that they're fighting a Palestinian cause. But actually, beloved ones, all of them that were under the Turkish Empire until 1917 were Palestinians, and not the Arabs that are claiming to be Palestinians today. In other words, the Palestinian cause, then it's a Jewish cause, because the ones that were here until 1917 and in this area, the first colonizers that were around this area were not only Arabs, but they were Jews. אז עוד משהו שאתה יכול להגיד לי על התעודת זהות הפלסטינאית הזאת?
התעודת זהות הזאת היא הייתה כתובה בערבית, כי הטורקים השתמשו באותיות ערביות. אני לא ראיתי את התעודה, נכון, אבל אבא שלי סיפר לי, הרבה שנים הוא שמר על התעודה הזאת.
So here you've got the son of a Jew that is a Palestinian. We are going to ask Amir about the strategical location that we are in. So, Amir, תספר לנו קצת על למה אתה אומר שהמקום הזה כל כך אסטרטגי.
מפני שמוצא היא הכניסה לירושלים מצד מערב. כל מי שרצה להגיע מכיוון יפו לירושלים, היה חייב לעבור דרך מוצא, כי הדרך האפר מיפו לירושלים עברה דרך מוצא, וכיוון גבעת שאול נכנסה לירושלים. גם היה פה מלון דרכים, בשפה הטורקית פרסית חן, גם אנשים נחו פה לפני העלייה לירושלים, יש פה גם באר וגם מעיין, עתיקים, שתו, נתנו שתייה ואוכל לבהמות, והמשיכו לירושלים, או ברגל או עם עגלות.
אתה אמרת גם שהיה פה איזה מין בית מקדש, ספר לנו?
כן, נכון. לפני שנים אחדות היו פה חפירות הצלה בגלל שינוי כביש מספר 1. גילו פה מקדש קטן שהעולים לרגל לירושלים חנו פה חנייה ועשו תפילה במקדש הקטן הזה לפני 3,000 שנה.
Can you imagine that this ancient little place of prayer for the pilgrims going to the temple in Jerusalem is 3,000 years old. In other words, we are dealing with Jerusalem being the capital of Israel and the place where the Israelite pilgrims would go to worship the living God already for 3,000 years. And from Moza, they actually stayed here, they refreshed themselves, and the pilgrims continued on their journey to the holy city. תספר לי קצת יותר על האסטרטגיה של המקום, אתה אומר שזה אסטרטגיה כי זה שערי ירושלים.
נכון, המקום הזה הוא מיוחד במינו, מפני שיש פה אדמה פוריה, עמק מוצא, ויש פה מעיינות שכרגע לא נובעים בגלל 5 שנים של בצורת, אבל המעיינות קיימים, עמק מוצא קיים, המקום נבע מים וחקלאות, היו פה ירקות, היו פה עצי פרי, ואנשים התפרנסו מחקלאות, גם מרפת של פרות, גם מתרנגולות, ופה היה יישוב פורח מאוד. היום יש פה יישוב לא חקלאי, אבל העמק קיים, עמק מוצא, עמק הארזים, והופך להיות פה עכשיו פארק ירושלים.
And it basically is the gate. Both Moza, Mevaseret Zion around here as well, what is called the Castel, the Mount Castel, all this area around here is actually the gate of the holy city of Jerusalem, and it has been inhabited by our people for thousands and thousands of years. In fact, not far away from here, even also in the mountains of Jerusalem, we can definitely see places like where the Ark of the Covenant rested when King David, or before King David, brought it to Jerusalem and pitched a tent for it. Some of the most important biblical areas, the mountains of Jerusalem, the gate of Jerusalem, a strategic location at the gate of the most important city in the world, Jerusalem, the holy city. Last words, מילים אחרונות.
כן, רציתי לסכם שכיוון שמוצא הייתה מקום חקלאי וישבה על הדרך מכיוון יפו, מכיוון מערב לירושלים, המקום התפתח. היום יש כאן שתי שכונות גדולות מאוד, מוצא עילית ורמת מוצא. גרות פה היום כ-600-700 משפחות שמתפרנסות לא מחקלאות אלא בעיקר מעבודות בירושלים, אבל המקום פורח. כביש מספר 1 עובר עכשיו פה לשמאלנו על הגשר, אפשר לצלם ולראות את הגשר במקום סיבוב מוצא הקשה ומלא תאונות. והיום הכביש רחב, כביש נוח, כביש בטוח יותר, וכניסה לירושלים נוספת תהיה בעוד 4-5 שנים.
So it looks like the living God, the God of Israel, wants to strengthen the gates of Jerusalem. I am right now standing with one of my most dear people in the world. He is my cousin from the side of my maternal grandfather, and my family has been here in the gates of Jerusalem, in the mountains of Jerusalem, especially in the Motza area, from almost time immemorial. The family came here in 1930. I'm going to ask my cousin Eli Mizrahi to tell me about this. Eli, המשפחה הגיעה לפה מתי ולמה הגיעה לפה?
אבא שלי היה בגיל 17, הוא גר בעיר העתיקה, גם ההורים שלו נולדו בעיר העתיקה. הוא אהב טבע ולטפל בעזים, בכבשים, ועיר העתיקה לא הייתה מתאימה לזה. אז הוא חיפש מחוץ לעיר העתיקה, מחוץ לחומות, מקום שיש צמחייה ושאפשר שם לגדל עזים וכבשים.
וזה מאוד יפה. ואז אתה כבר הגעת ישר לפה, או אתה גדלת פה, נולדת פה, מה?
אני נולדתי ב-1932 במוצא.
ואלי, תאמר לי, כמה משפחה יש לנו היום פה במוצא? כמה אנשים?
30 איש.
So about 30 people in this city of Motza are from my family. And of course from the side of Eli, whose mother was actually the sister of my maternal grandfather. Until 1929, there was a Jewish nurse here from a family called Machlef. And this Jewish nurse used to take care of the Arab patients of the area. She used to administer medication and healing to them. Okay.
ואז הייתה תעמולה מאוד חריפה של ההנהגה הדתית הערבית, והם ירדו מהכפר מקולוניה למשפחה הזו ורצחו שם, נדמה לי 7 איש, את האישה, את הבעל, ושני ילדים ועוד 2 אורחים שבאו מירושלים.
And the nurses had been doing good to them, and they attacked the family and they killed 7 members of their family plus additional guests that were there, repaying therefore evil for good. And one of the sons of the Machlef family that managed to escape somehow from the balcony and managed to therefore survive this horrendous massacre is actually Mordechai Machlef, who was the 2nd chief of staff of the IDF. אלי, תאמר לי, אתה שירתת במלחמת השחרור, נכון? ב-1948, אז אני מניחה היית בן 16. כן. ספר לי קצת על המלחמה ומה היה קשור למוצא עם המלחמה.
יש שני רבדים. אחד זה שכשאני שירתתי לא כלוחם, אלא שמירות בצפון תלפיות, ברמת רחל, שכונות שהיו להם גבולות עם כפרים ערביים, והיה צריך שם לשמור בקו ראשון, אבל לא לחמתי ממש מלחמה, אלא זאת אומרת הייתי בשמירות.
עכשיו תאמר לי, ומה החשיבות של האזור הזה בזמן מלחמת השחרור?
ככה, מוצא הייתה יישוב, נאמר ככה, בדרך לירושלים, היה לאורך הדרך מבאבל וואד, שזה באבל וואד, כן, היה קריית ענבים, קיבוץ, מוצא ומעלה החמישה. השאר הכל היה כפרים ערביים. עכשיו, במלחמת השחרור, הם בקלות רבה, כולל הקסטל שהם סגרו את הכביש. לא נתנו לשיירות לעלי ירושלים בירושלים. ירושלים הייתה במצור. היו צריכים לפרוץ את המצור הזה.
Motza was on the way of that road. Kiryat Anavim and of course the Castell, where we planted the flag of the United Nations for Israel in Sukkot of 2017. And so this area suffered from this terrible siege. So from Latrun, all the way through the gate of the valley, or Shar Haggai, and all the way to Bab Eluad, the ancient road to Jerusalem, there was such a siege that there was no water coming into the city, well, no food, no ammunition. And the army managed finally, the very young, I couldn't even call it the IDF yet, managed to break through the lines, but it took about 2 years, and the breakthrough happened at the Castell, which is not far away from here where the breakthrough happened. Now, many people died trying to actually open the road to Jerusalem. We're going to ask Eli about this.
בעיקר בקסטל היו שתי התקפות מאוד קשות, שבאחת ההתקפות שינה את כל המצב, זה היה כשנהרג עבד אל-קאדר אל-חוסייני. הפלמ"ח שם כבש את המקום, אבל היה עסוק במשימות אחרות, והעביר את זה לכיש, שהם היו פחות לוחמים נועזים, והערבים הצליחו לכבוש את זה בחזרה, ואחר כך שוב פעם הפלמ"ח עם החיש הצליחו להדוף את הערבים, וככה הקסטל בידינו, ומי ששלט על הקסטל היה בקלות רבה לא מאפשר לאף רכב לעבור על הכביש, כי ממש הם שלטו על הכביש עם כלים אפילו לא כל כך כבדים, יכלו בשקט לשתק את התנועה.
But it was only when the leader of all of the Arab militia that was there, Abdel Kader el-Husseini, who is from the family of the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem at the time, Haj Amin al-Husseini. Only when Abdel Kader al-Husseini was killed, then they lost heart, and finally the soldiers of the Palmach, or the pre-IDF, managed to open the way to Jerusalem. So it was open, and it is still open at the expense of much blood. Here in Moza is where the house of this terrible enemy of Israel, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin el-Husseini, had his summer house right behind me right now. And this is, right above the house, you can see there's a Highway 1, which is the main highway to Jerusalem, that was blocked actually by all the Arab enemies of Israel in 1948, led by a family member of Haj Amin al-Husseini, Abdel Kader el-Husseini, that eventually was killed by the Palmach, the pre-IDF, and finally this whole area was opened up to Jerusalem. But you can see the house right here at the way in this place, and it's like a block where the Word of God is very clear about. It says the scepter of wickedness will not remain in the land allotted for the righteous. And really this house is like a living testimony, a living witness that the scepter of wickedness had remained in the land that was allotted to the Jewish people for far too long, and was actually causing murder and bloodshed in the area. And today, praise the living God, this house is in ruins and the way to Jerusalem is open. We break the curse that the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem brought here through Hitler for the final solution of the Jewish people through the Palestinian cause. Today, the 70th of Israel, it is overturned in Yeshua's name.